Well, welcome everybody to the ninth Create HDR series for this year. And I know we've got some people joining for the very first time from different places throughout the world. So a very warm welcome to each of you. And my name's Sue Orlovich, and it's a pleasure to be introducing the session today. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land upon which I work and learn today. I'm on the land of the Darawal people and pay respect to elders past, present and emerging, and recognise their continuing connection to land, water and culture. And I extend that respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander colleagues who may be with us today. So I invite you to introduce yourselves in the chat, and you might like to also acknowledge the land upon which you're joining us from today. And just a reminder that we record each of the sessions, and they're made available on the YouTube Create channel for you to go back and revisit, or for those of you who aren't able to watch today. And for those of you who are joining us for the very first time, really warm welcome to you. So it's a pleasure to introduce Pat Thompson and her colleague Liam Maloy. And Liam, I'm afraid I don't have an introduction and a bio for you, but I might let you do that yourself, or Pat might like to assist in that way as well. But it's such a pleasure to really warmly welcome Pat and Liam today. So Pat Thompson is Professor of Education in the School of Education at the University of Nottingham. She's a former principal of disadvantaged schools in South Australia, and her areas of research are leading school change, the arts and creativity in schools and communities, as well as academic writing and doctoral research. And I know many of you, like myself, are probably familiar with Pat's wonderful blog, the Patter blog. So today, Pat's going to present with her colleague Liam on a fascinating research project that involved investigating arts-rich primary schools. And she'll share with us some of the early results of the 3-year study that explored 40 schools' diverse arts practices and shared arts commitments. And as Pat's presenting with Liam today, you might have some wonderings, some questions, some curiosities. Feel free to pop them in the chat or note them down, and we'll have an opportunity to explore some of those wonderings at the end of the session. So we're really thrilled and very appreciative, Pat and Liam, that you've been able to join us at what is an early hour of the morning in the UK. So a really warm welcome to you, and thank you so much for your generosity in sharing your time with us this afternoon, this morning, your time. So over to both of you.
Okay, thank you. I might just let Liam say 2 or 3 brief things about himself. So he's a senior research fellow in the School of Education, primarily working on the RAPS project, but he might want to say a couple of things about himself besides that.
Okay, yes. I now work as a senior research fellow, but working in arts in primary schools. My research background and my PhD is in music for children. So I do some research and have a book in that area. But obviously, I've done previous research projects with Pat as a research assistant, and now as a research fellow in different areas of primarily arts, craft and design education.
And Liam's a musician and also works in schools as an artist in schools. We're doing this and that now. Like a lot of people, I think, in the Create Centre, has got kind of practice background. Okay, so we're going to do something slightly clumsy. I'm going to start, share my screen, and then stop and hand over to Liam, and then Liam's going to say some things about the research he's doing, and then come back to me for some of the emerging results. So I'm going to start by just talking about the background to the RAPS project and kind of setting the scene for it. And then, because we thought that people who are doing doctorates or have recently finished their doctorate might be interested actually in the kind of research design, we focused equally on research design really as the kinds of things that we're finding out. So let me just share my screen. There we go. Okay, so the project is actually still going on at the moment, and I'll explain that in a minute. But I just wanted to start by talking about this arts-rich idea. So it's an idea that's not ours. We've taken from the work of James Catterall, and some of you might be familiar with this particular piece of work. Although it's his work, it's the other longitudinal study that he's done looking at young people who are in alternative programs that's actually cited a lot more, but in my view, this is a much more interesting study. And he developed this idea of the arts-rich secondary school, which was characterised by students being able to graduate in arts subjects. So in other words, there was a full secondary program leading to, college-ready subjects. The presence of clubs in the school. There was a formal arts department and specialist staff. And that was what he called schools that were arts rich. And of course, that actually matches the description of a lot of secondary schools in the UK and in Australia. But apparently in the US, this is kind of less common. But the Nell study, Catterall's Nell study, followed about 12,000 students nationally over 12 years. And they developed a kind of index for arts richness, which they were able to apply so that they could follow these students and work out what they were doing in relation to whether they went to an arts rich school, or as we now also call them, arts poor schools. Schools that aren't arts rich are by definition arts poor. And what his study found was that, by the time these young people were 20, low income, and I'll just read this, low income students who'd attended arts rich schools were 14% more likely to be in further or higher education. And of those in higher education, 50% more likely to be studying for a BA than low income students in arts poor schools. And they've also got this sort of very strong record of voluntary civic activities above the national average. And Catterall actually argues that if you wanted to find a program that actually made a difference to disadvantaged students, you're hard pressed to find one that has results as impressive as this, and that any government worth its salt that was serious about making a difference to education with disadvantage would actually look at what happens in arts-rich schools. And we've taken this really as our kind of starting point. And he can't really explain how it is that this happens in arts-rich schools. We got a little bit closer to explaining some of it, I think, in the TAIL project, and we hope to get further actually by looking at it in primary schools. And I now want to kind of tell you about the TAIL study, which was I'm not going to talk about it in detail, but it's the first study that we did in secondary schools, which has led on to the current study. And we have got a book coming out about the TAIL study. It'll be out in February or March next year. And you can see that from this, and I think I've talked about this to Create before, that we're actually talking about an arts education that is not simply about doing well in the subject, but actually equips you for life. So it really takes up those kinds of questions of what kind of pathways students who do the arts actually kind of take up, and why it is that actually they're more civically engaged. We were interested in the TAIL study. We started by looking with our partners, the Royal Shakespeare Company and Tate. We started by looking at teachers who'd had a long-term engagement with either of the two companies. And what we were interested in, while we'd done quite a lot of work on what teachers got from their professional development, we actually didn't have a clue about what they did with it in their classrooms. So the TAIL study was really set up to look at what did these teachers who'd done a lot of professional development with the RSC and Tate, what did they do back in school, and could we see anything about what happened for the students? So that project, and here's the design, looked at 30 secondary schools. They were purposeful, what we call in the research kind of language, we call it a purposeful sample. And we looked at these 30 secondary schools over 3 years. 15 of them nominated by the RSC and 15 by Tate. We interviewed a couple of teachers in each school. The number is slightly more than 60 because of teacher turnover, but we've interviewed those two teachers in each school each year. We interviewed senior leaders at the start and end of the project. We interviewed 1,400 odd senior secondary students in focus groups. We did a survey across the senior secondary students in the schools, which we were able to compare to a national survey called Taking Part. We looked at school docs and images, documents, and took a lot of images, as we're doing in this project. And that was funded by Arts Council England. And at that time, is still the biggest research project into secondary school arts education in the country. And what we found really was that there was a kind of, and the notion of a school ecology is quite an old one in the educational change literature. It's been around for some 50 years, people thinking about school as an ecology, and how it is things that happen in one place have effects somewhere else. There's quite a long tradition of that in the change literatures. And we wanted to talk about an arts-rich ecology, and that they're the elements that were kind of key in the arts-rich ecology. We were able to demonstrate through the survey that students in the senior secondary students, regardless of whether they were still studying an arts subject, actually participated in more cultural activities outside of school than their peers. And we've kind of theorised this as them being both active producers and critical appreciative audiences. And that's what we call cultural citizenship. Young people are engaged in this kind of cultural conversations and active in that in various ways. And we talked about what the arts richness of their school was, the presence of a broad and balanced arts curriculum, seen as, having parity with other subjects in the junior years, additional activities, strong support from leadership, and arts being part of the kind of school's identity, part of their DNA, as they usually say. Integral to that were the presence of what we've called arts broker teachers, who were able to, and who not only generally had an arts practice themselves and were active arts participants, but also kind of mediated the way in which and encouraged young people to their students to engage in arts activities. They brought stuff in, they took the kids out, and they were kind of in a mutually productive relationship with their schools. They negotiated the curriculum, they managed the kind of national assessment, which is quite difficult in the UK, and to retain a particular form of pedagogy with the students, which wasn't sort of test and exam oriented. They created these kind of what we've talked about as atmospheres. We've got a paper in IJADE about art room atmosphere, and the kind of cultural capitals that they worked with were very inclusive. So you can see there's a Bourdieu framing going on in the background of this, and we've sort of theorised the CPD offer as a kind of immersive, really whole body engagement with the arts, which was offered by Tate and the RSC. Of course, what that didn't do was tell us anything about what had happened to the students before then. And we really wanted to know what was going on in primary schools. So we've now had, funded by the Freelands Foundation, which is a new kind of charity in the arts in England. We've had a project funded which looks at 40 primary schools. We started with a short list of over 185, which we got really by looking at who had a kind of what's called a platinum arts mark, which is a kind of process, 3-level process of getting an award from the Arts Council about having a particular level of arts program in the school, as well as other lists and recommendations from regional arts organisations who knew the schools well. We started out with 185. We invited them all to do a survey. We see about 75 of them took part in the survey. And the next phase of it, which we've completed, were case study visits to 40 of the 75 schools, which we selected to be kind of around the country and broadly representative of different kinds of primary schools. What we've just started on are now further visits to 22. So we've reduced the size again of those 40. We're now following up with 22 of those schools, but we've also got 22 comparator schools. So they're in the same kind of family of schools. And what we're going to do is to survey, well, actually we started surveying the children in those 44 schools about their experiences in arts participation, what it's like being in an arts rich or an arts poor school. And we also are going to survey the generalist as opposed to the specialist teachers in both sets of schools about their arts teaching experiences. Right, so I'm going to talk quickly about the survey. So in the survey, we asked some basic questions about what the schools taught, what subjects the schools taught, arts subjects, how long they were taught for, the kind of facilities they had, the kind of partnerships they had, and the kind of specialist staff they had. So we've got a kind of basic understanding of these 75 arts-rich primary schools. And what we can see is that they all have a really serious arts offer at every year level to all the students. And nearly all of them teach art and music all year to all the kids. And they have specialist staff in those two areas, and quite often, although not in all schools, specialist facilities. And that certainly confirms our view of the core of what's an arts-rich primary schools. Many of them offered other arts subjects as well. Design and technology was very strong, and it's in free fall in secondary schools, which was interesting. However, craft is not in a very good state, although there are some of the primary schools that we're in where different crafts are very strong. And film and photography were also we were surprised at how low they were, given how readily available the equipment is. But although we are in schools where now, in our selection of 40, we've actually tried to get schools where these arts forms are practiced. And they all had the expected kind of range of partnerships with arts organisation, and many of them had other specialist staff and visiting artists coming in quite a lot. So we can say, I think, with some sort of certainty, the sort of basic provision that there is in an arts-rich primary school. And this is very different to the norm in most primary schools, where they generally they don't have staff, and they really kind of struggle, I think, to offer year-long programs. Okay, stop screen share. I'm now handing over to Liam. He's going to talk about what one of these case study visits actually looks like and what he does.
Okay, so in my visits to the 40 schools last year and now 22 schools this year, I collect data from staff. So I conduct semi-structured interviews with head teachers or senior leaders, sometimes deputy or assistant head teachers that have some overview of the arts. I speak to arts lead teachers if there's an overriding one, or if there are other subject-specific arts leads, like a music lead or drama or a dance lead. I speak to a non-specialist teacher, always somebody that has to deliver some arts or music or singing, but is not a specialist. And I speak to other staff, artists in residence, visiting artists, governors who have a specific role in the arts, and partnership or outreach people from cultural institutions like galleries or theatres, or places like the Royal Opera House that come into the school and work with the children. These are the questions that I ask the staff. Generally, these are the main questions. Just very generally, tell us about the importance of the arts in your school. How does arts leadership work here? Tell us about your background in the arts, if any. Tell us about the curriculum in detail, obviously. Students' progression in the arts, use of feedback and assessment. How do you teach children to achieve such outstanding work? We want to know about cultural partnerships, who the school is involved with, and their links with the community and the parent body, and how exactly does CPD, professional development, work in the school. And are there any challenges to growing, maintaining an arts-rich provision? And what are your plans for the future? Or how are you also reacting to the current situation? I also collect data from students. So this is a self-portrait by a Year 6 student in a school in London. It has gold leaf on it, just out of interest. So I conduct similar semi-structured interviews with groups of Year 4, Year 5, and Year 6. So these students are approximately 9, 10, 11, and 12 years old. I also speak to members of extracurricular art clubs, like a music club, choir, dance. Interviewed a group of cheerleaders once. Room 13 is a specialist student, fairly autonomous arts provision, student-run arts provision within schools. I speak to, if they have groups of art ambassadors, sometimes called arts counsellors, and I ask them, tell me about some of the creative things that you do in school. Tell us about your favourite subjects. Why do you like it? What do you enjoy about it? Describe your typical arts session. Why do you think it's important to do the arts in school? How do you get good, or how do you get better at an arts subject? Different arts subjects, be specific. How do you know that you're getting better? Do you practice any arts at home or in a club outside school? Do you have a parent or family member who's an artist, musician, etc.? And have you done any arts projects around issues that are important to you? And if they say no, I say, are there any issues that are important to you that you'd like to do arts projects? Usually the arts leads are sitting in on the interviews, so they're picking up ideas. So I visit the schools and we look at the outside of the school. How does it welcome me or the parents or the students into the school? This is a school that's called Beecroft Garden, so they've got a huge bee on the outside. The other buildings are bee themed. Different ways that schools will introduce you or welcome you into the reception area. This is a school that I was in yesterday, in fact, in Newcastle. It's called Hotspur School. This is Hotspur as well. They have artwork all the way down the outside of the fence, and a specific art project that they did during lockdown. And we look at the reception area or the foyer. What does it communicate and to whom? So what do they have in their certificates, artworks, trophies, different certificates that tell us different things, that they're a UNICEF rights respecting school, for example, or they have Artsmark certification that Pat's just talked about, or different types of certification. Or do they have big status art pieces? This one says, here we are free. So, huge piece of artwork, or here's some paintings and a dress or that they've made, or Nelson Mandela in a tiny rural school in Cheshire. This huge reception area has a piano, which does get played in reception, and a vending machine that has books in it. So, what does the reception area say? Then I have a tour of the school, usually led by the arts lead, occasionally by students. In this particular school, they're called Young Arts Leads, or YALs. I look at art spaces, art rooms or art studios, music rooms, dance studios, halls, places where performance and rehearsals can happen. And I sometimes, the school will have a specialist facility like a radio studio, a kiln, or some extensive forest school provision. So here's a selection of arts rooms or art studios. You can see the difference. This one's quite busy on the walls, lots of wood and primary colors, clean and bright. That's my computer messing up there. Lovely clean art room. Outdoor performance spaces, small or large. This one was created specifically as a COVID provision to make sure that performance went on during lockdown. I look at arts displays. So I look at display boards, if they've set up some sort of gallery, sculptures or 3D arts. I look at students' work. Also in some schools, staff work, if their practitioners, will be displayed alongside the students' work. A couple of schools I've been in have loaned art pieces from galleries, local galleries. And I look at sketchbooks. So here's a selection of display boards. This is a kind of, it says masterpieces. So either students or staff have selected pieces to go on a kind of artist of the week or artist of the year board. This is some staff work that was presented very much in alongside the students' work in a foyer, actually. I thought this was quite interesting about criminality and delinquency. These are some loaned pieces, and this one I was told was incredibly expensive. It's a piece of bronze sculpture from 1935 in a different school. This is huge canvases, and these are extensively displayed and were selected by the children to be placed in the school. And these are just some examples of sketchbook work. I look at the rest of the school just to pick up some what are called symptoms of arts richness. So some schools have an eco schools report or a qualification. They've deliberately put lots of plants, natural light, wooden chairs, wooden floors, replaced floors to put wood floors in. Look at reading areas, whether they've got more of a traditional library or whether the books are in the corridors. Outside, I guess schools have trees, allotments, greenhouses. One school has what's called an earth kitchen, which I'll get to in a minute. So this is an eco schools qualification where they've had experts in to measure temperature, humidity, lighting, etc., pollution levels, and schools have done lots of things about it, including getting lots of plants, replacing floors, getting different air conditioning, keeping windows shut or open, etc. Also look at the locality, what's immediately next to the school, what's the area like. This huge Anglican cathedral, the largest religious building in England, sits right next to Lipper Primary School in Liverpool. This is a school in Cambridge, built on brown site, but this is a school that looks immediately over the sea. This is a rural school, looks over fields. This is the Royal Crescent in Bath, which is right next to a school called St Andrews. This is the school, the picture on the right, I am standing with my back to the school door. This is in Soho in London, so right in the adult area of London. And then look for some unique features that some of the schools have, whether they have animals, goats or chicks or water buffalo on the bottom left. One school has in Eastbourne, stained glass windows, pink staircases, beekeeping, etc. These are two unusual buildings that are on our list. University of Cambridge on the left, New Burley and Leeds on the right, which we are revisiting this year. And if I get time, I try to visit some of the galleries, theatres and places where the school has visited, or if they've talked about a specific workshop or installation that they've seen. So these are just two examples of an open air theatre in Cornwall and the New Lynn Contemporary Art Gallery, which is 100 yards away from the school on the same road. This is a case study visit. I visited the school twice now, last year, and just revisited it last year. It's in Camden in London. And again, this is me with my back to the school gates, looking out over the mostly what we call social or council housing. But again, this is a kind of exemplar arts-rich school where the arts just permeate everything. This is a banner on the right, which displays their commitment to STEAM, science and technology, engineering, arts and maths. So they're not only a UNICEF rights respecting school, but they're a flagship school. They work very, very closely with UNICEF. UNICEF involved them in lots of projects about the rights of the child and all the articles. And they're branded as a STEAM school. So the exec head sits on the Camden STEAM board, and they have many examples of where they combine arts and maths, science and technology, arts threaded through everything. These are just some examples where they've used science and art. On the right is a piece of amoeba art. So these are in Petri dishes. And again on the right, this is Leonardo da Vinci, where they've used art. Obviously, there's more background work that they're doing about Leonardo da Vinci. And they go very big on these huge displays. These are kind of wall-sized displays or door-sized displays. On the right, you can see this is in the style of Fritz Kahn. These kind of process drawings where they're using art and design to talk about scientific or engineering processes. And again, this is their Science Week explainer art, huge board that there's been produced. And again, they're at Oracy Centre for Excellence, and finding that a lot of the schools that I visit have some commitment to oracy and speaking and verbal language. One of my colleagues in the School of Education is conducting a separate research study on this school specifically and in oracy. So Toriana has diverse economic and social backgrounds, mostly Black and South Asian students. And I do a lot of artwork and a lot of other work on Black History Month, very much doing work about local history, community, social justice, art projects, often on a large scale, high. The rooms themselves are big, so they've developed this idea of doing huge art pieces. So this is some work they've done for Black History Month. There's Emily Sandy, Michael Kuwanuka, and some more local figures. And so just on the staircase is these big monochrome self-portraits. They were studying an artist called J.R. So this is a giant head of Ada Lovelace, who is a mathematician. She's the daughter of Lord Byron and a kind of polymath scientist. This is a more recent piece of work about Alice in Wonderland. Each card was created by individual students, and again, lots of big banners. They did some protest marches, but created these banners, obviously in the style of the suffragettes. And they've got lots of arts partners. Not only are they partnered with the Royal Opera House, but the executive head is on the board of the Royal Opera House, and just list some companies and organisations that they're linked with. Central St Martin's is Art College, Royal Society of the Arts, and Complicité Theatre Company, that they've done a kind of maths and dance project with Complicité. This is their foyer. We talked about foyer, so you can see very clearly that their commitment to STEAM from the poster. The UNICEF Rights of the Child banner are up there. The little squares on the window there are all the individual articles of the UNICEF Rights of the Child, and they will tag all their artworks with specific articles. This is their outdoor space. So again, we're in fairly central, not central London, but just on the outskirts of London. So they've spent some time being artistic in the outdoor spaces. They do music. They have a radio room, and this is their earth kitchen. So they use excess food that's generated through the school canteen to make smoothies, nothing goes to waste. They redistribute food, and they compost food as well. And this is the room in which I conducted all my interviews, just as an example there, and just to show that everything's got a kind of designness to it, or a kind of purpose to it. So I'll stop sharing there. That's the end of me.
Okay, so I'm just going to quickly try and go through a little bit, and I think Liam's already hinted at what I'm going to talk about. Really, you can see some of this emerging in the one school. I think one of the things we can see from the 40 schools is that there are really diverse ways to be arts rich, that they become arts rich in very different ways. And I think this is helpful in a context in which the government is fond of thinking there's one best way to do things. I think what we can suggest is that there are infinite numbers of ways to actually be arts rich, but there are some kind of common patterns. I think the key thing we've been focusing on really is the kind of children's attainment in the arts areas, and a lot of the work that they do is staggeringly good. And I mean, I hope we've managed to convey some of that. The teachers have, what I call sky high standards, and the kids are absolutely supported and required at the same time to produce what we call their best and most beautiful work. And they do talk about things like beauty. And what we think that the project is going to be able to show is what children can actually do, and what all children might be able to produce if they actually had these kind of opportunities. And we understood the arts as being an entitlement. We could see what it is that, your average kid can actually do if they're given the opportunities and the support. What we can also see is something around something which appears in a lot of the research literature, which is the relationship between specialist teachers and generalist teachers, or the non-specialists. The first thing that we can see is that the specialist teachers take responsibility for their own professional development in a very kind of serious and sustained way, very often supported by their schools, but they've got a kind of strong commitment to their own professional learning. And some of the arts specialist teachers that we've seen are, have really significant bodies of what we would understand to be pedagogic content knowledge. They really have, outstanding sort of expertise, which they've developed in situ. And they often work at a kind of national level, outside their schools, regionally, nationally. They're writing books. People know who they are. People know who some of these people are, and some of them they don't. But this this goes further than the notion of the arts broker teacher. We haven't got a label for what this is yet, but we can see that there is something here about the level of expertise that some of these teachers have, which is really significant. The arts teaching is organised in different ways. If the school's small enough, the arts specialists often do a lot of the teaching, but when in the schools that are bigger, the arts specialists can't do it all. And so the generalist teachers, are heavily involved in classroom arts subject teaching. And even in the small schools, the generalist teachers, the specialists can't do it all. So there's this kind of relationship between the specialist and the generalist, which is of interest. And you'd probably be aware that a lot of the research suggests that generalist primary teachers don't feel very confident in teaching the arts. They often don't have a lot of background. They don't have a lot of expertise themselves. There's quite a lot of Australian research which suggests that. Our sense at the moment is that this is probably not the case in the arts-rich schools, that the generalist arts teachers, we suspect, feel more supported and much more comfortable with actually teaching an arts-rich curriculum because they've got somebody on site they can talk to, obviously, and they're getting resources and support. But our survey, we hope, is actually going to be able to kind of back that up, and we'll get a comparison between 22 of the schools and teachers in 22 other schools which aren't arts-rich. But we think that there's something kind of helpful to be able to say about the way that will emerge about the relationship between specialist and generalist teachers in the arts-rich schools. The environment, I think you've already got that sense from Liam, I'm sure, from what Liam's shown you, is that the environment in which the kids are located is very carefully thought about, and they have really different approaches to this. You know, we've had school, you know, one school which is just stripped back to real kind of minimalism. We've got, you know, Scandi schools where there's sort of Scandi style decor. We've got other schools which are, you know, highly domestic in the furniture and the spaces they create for children. We've got schools that are absolutely, you know, overflowing with stuff, with cabinets of curiosity and, you know, little areas of things that you can explore. You know, so but regardless of what it is, they've been carefully thought about. They've often, this is carried out from the inside of the school to the outside of the school. But they don't all have specialist arts facilities, as I've already said, and they don't all have proximity to local arts facilities and cultural centres. So you can be arts, the point here, of course, is you can be arts rich if you don't have the flash dance studio and if you don't have the purpose-built radio station, and you've just got a gymnasium or a school hall, and you've got fairly mediocre grounds, and the nearest gallery is a long way away, you can still do it. And we've got schools that show that you can still do it. And our interesting kind of mood relates to this kind of learning environment or the atmosphere of the school, that, you know, there's something which in secondary schools is confined to the art rooms. In the arts-rich primary schools is actually the whole environment, is very much related to this kind of focused way of working, connected to the pedagogies of the arts, which are, you know, sustained over time, challenging, engaging, connected, etc. Are part of what we're talking about as being the characteristics of the arts. And we've started to kind of work on the notion of signature pedagogies of the arts and how that connects with this mood or atmosphere, the affect that you get when you kind of go into a school and you feel something or other as a visitor, is very characteristic of these schools. You see Liam and I've used some of the same pictures, never mind. Primary schools are because they're smaller than secondary schools, there's a different relationship between the leadership and the arts leads and the specialist art teachers. Interestingly, some of the heads in the arts-rich primary schools have arts backgrounds themselves and are active in the arts, you know, leading choirs, or I think in one of the schools we've got someone who was in Lord of the Dance and just performs the occasional Irish dance at school assemblies, you know, or, you know, people who have an arts practice themselves. So that's kind of interesting. And the leadership were, you know, part of this, of making this process of connections. It wasn't just up to the arts leads. The kind of leadership were also engaged in this activity as well. And there was a strong focus, I think, which Liam's already talked about, in relation to connections with other subjects, other school priorities. So it wasn't just that the school was arts rich, the school had a set of kind of priorities that they kind of combined together, which is what they were concerned with, whether it was rights or philosophy for children or citizenship or whatever that. But, you know, many of them had ways of involving children in supporting the arts, promoting the arts, and they were often through these kind of arts councils. I think Liam went to one school and was greeted by the Minister for the Arts, I think, and the school arts council. So, you know, this is all part of the sort of school practices. And we're hoping that we're going to be able to pursue some of these questions further in the next stage. And we're particularly interested, I think, in the questions that Liam tabled earlier on now about progression and how it is that people actually manage to get the kids to produce this quality of work. I think we know quite a lot now about how the schools are organised and how they organise their budgets and their time and their space and their staffing. There's a bit more there to find out about specialist and generalist staff, but I think if we're going to make the case that arts-rich primary schools, you know, really do set the foundation to for different kinds of life trajectories, particularly for children who are, you know, whose families are doing it pretty hard in the UK at the moment, then we do need to get to grips with this comparator kind of information. So I'm going to stop there, and I guess we've got about 10 minutes for questions.
Oh, Pat and Liam, I found myself smiling as I was and feeling so energised and almost jealous that I wasn't in some of those amazing schools. Thank you so much for sharing what is.
When people tell you and you hear about all the terrible things that are happening in English schools, that's all true, but understand that it's not all like that. And the British primary school, the old British primary school lives on, and some of those old British primary schools, that British primary school tradition is specialises in the arts, and some of those schools are amazing. You would give your back teeth if you were a parent to have your kids in some of these schools, really. Very privileged.
I noticed, Terry, you popped in the chat as Liam was showing some of those images that you want to go to all these schools. You were amazed.
Yeah, and I mean, my breath is taken away. That's absolutely amazing. It's very, very different from what we have in South Africa. I've never seen a school that comes close to matching that. It's outstanding. It's so exciting. And I also thought when I did the ha la la la, I'm like, I hope that doesn't culturally translate as like mocking and going la 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 or something. It's a ululation. It's a celebration.
Yes, I noticed that when Liam was sharing the Nelson Mandela artwork.
Indeed.
Yeah. Katrina, did you have any questions that you wanted Pat or Liam to further explore?
First I just want to agree with what Terry was just saying in relation to our Australian context. You know, it's quite astonishing to see that level of visual arts in primary schools. I've worked in primary schools in New South Wales for over 20 years, and I've never seen anything like it. And I guess the point is that we do not have specialist teachers usually not in any curriculum areas. I mean, some schools might specifically employ someone for a priority curriculum area, but, the vast majority of us are generalist teachers and somehow have to come to grips with, 4 arts areas within one curriculum, dance, music, visual arts and drama. And that's an incredible ask for any generalist teacher to, have real authentic skills in all those different strands of the arts. So, I mean, just that one thing that you've talked about, having those specialist teachers in those schools, obviously, raises the bar incredibly and shows you what children can do when that bar is high and the teachers have the skills and the professional development that can accommodate that or facilitate that. So, yeah, absolutely fascinating. Thank you.
I'm certainly aware of some schools primary schools in Australia, and certainly in South Australia where I'm from, I'm aware of some schools having some specialist staff. As in England, this is a decision that the head has to make, that they're going to deliberately go out and get people who are specialists. There's not that many specialists that are trained. I've just done another project looking at initial teacher education and the amount of arts that people get in initial teacher education, and it's woeful in general primary education. And but there are some universities where there are specialist options available, and of course some artists who choose to enter primary teacher education as well. And of course in Australia, the kind of peripatetic music services have often been a way that the music curriculum has been dealt with.
Yes, and also dance.
That's also true, but there is, of course, a generalist music curriculum that teachers are also expected to manage. I mean, we have seen a couple of schools which are close to the North American model of arts integration, which is where you actually have every teacher in the primary school who is both an arts specialist and a generalist primary teacher. That's the art integration model. We've got 2 of the schools in the 40, and I think 1 in the 22, which are close to that, although that's not entirely the case, but where they've got a number of generalist teachers who are actually arts specialists, and where they teach, I mean, all subjects in and through the arts in their classroom. That's a North American model. But yes, I mean, I think you can absolutely see what happens if you've got a specialist teacher. But, you know, some of the schools, I mean, I think, for example, I think in the opening slide I showed, there was a little picture of a thatched school, which is a school called Summer Leighton. And Summer Leighton's got under 100 kids. So they're in mixed grades. The kids all do music, a lot of music. They do a lot of singing. In particular, there's a very strong choral tradition in the school. And I think their senior choir, which is, I think, every kid in year 5 and year 6, just are amazing. They, you know, what they do is absolutely stunning. And you just think, well, this is what you can, and I think, is it New Bewley, Liam, where they also is incredibly strong in Feversham, with incredibly strong kind of music where the kids are using different music traditions. I think there's Kadai and various other things that they do. They're not all doing the same thing, but where the kids do every day, they'd be doing music. And what they can do by the time they're in year 5 and 6 is stunning.
Yes, well, we had two.
Not to the detriment of their results as well. I mean, we have got some schools where they're in very disadvantaged areas where the kids' academic results are below the national average, and actually a couple where they're below their family average, the like school family average as well. But most of the schools are on par with their family or above.
Sorry, Pat. I was curious about you're talking about the specialist teacher and them being a knowledgeable other, and I'm curious about whether you notice commonalities in the way that the particularly arts-rich primary schools, how that specialist teacher practices in relation to the non-specialist teachers, and you almost were describing a connection and almost a bleeding together of the way that they might work. And I wondered whether you were noticing any particular practices of the specialist teacher that were emerging sort of beyond one setting and in multiple settings.
I think that's what we're hoping to be able to be much clearer about in this phase. But I think, or if you're an arts lead in a primary school, you're responsible for the professional development of other staff. So that would involve routinely, whether it's maths or anything else, would involve you supporting other teachers through the provision of some professional development, brokering professional development outside the school for them, and providing sets of resources that they can use. I think it also, in some of the cases, and I think that's that's the ideal, I think. And I think what we can see is that is actually what's being done generally in the arts with schools. And some of them, it's more than that. It's team teaching, it's whatever. So, it's... But the other thing to say is I think we also need to pursue is the support that the school gives to the specialist teacher in order to do this work.
Yeah.
So I know that in one of the schools, for example, the specialist teacher gets additional time off in order to do this kind of supporting preparatory work for supporting generalist teachers. So, that's a real kind of commitment. I don't know, Liam, if you want to add any more to what it is that the way the specialist teachers work.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a range of ways that they work, but very similar to what Pat said there, that they do have some commitment to working with other generalist teachers, either providing schemes of work or certainly CPD materials and sessions. A lot of the CPD is done through generalist teachers attending sessions by external artists, so being immersed and being participatory within the sessions that are taking place that are conducted by experts. Clearly, sometimes those experts might be the arts league teachers, but often if they have an opportunity, if there's an outsider expert or a workshop or art practice going on, that they're kind of immersed and participating within it. So there's definitely different models and more formalized processes where there's certain hours allocated or certain CPD sessions. But in some of these schools,
Liam, I recollect. I think it's in one of the schools. I think it's maybe the famous JR who just trying to anonymise the teachers, but not the schools. But I think who was talking to you about having to actually exert a bit of hierarchical authority on some of the generalist teachers in order to get them to kind of take the music curriculum, classroom curriculum more seriously, wasn't it?
Yeah. I've heard that a couple of times now where he's trying to encourage and train up generalist teachers in music, and with the view that starting from reception and early years and year one, is very much part of his progression, and some reluctant teachers, and he has to then lean on his seniority to persuade and negotiate the provision of that music. But
yeah, wonderful. Thank you. Robin, is there anything you wanted to add to the discussion before we start to wrap things up?
No, just to say, like everyone else, I so wish we had more support. I do take your point, Pat, but that's not happening in every school. But it's wonderful to see what can happen, because we've always said that, if we immerse children and young people in quality arts experiences, they can achieve so much. And it just proves the point. So it's such important research. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I so hope to be able at some point, when I'm back next year, to actually try and get to the Australia Council and say, why don't you get a program to get, a pilot program to get intensive arts in schools in, each state, and just see what you can do. It would be, given the Labor government, we might have a vague hope of getting something like that up. Who knows? They're always dazzled by the UK anyway, aren't they? So
yes, they are. Even the mistakes.
That's right. Don't just import the tests and Tom Bennett.
That's right.
Yeah. Have a look at this stuff.
Pat and Liam, can I really thank you on behalf of all of us for what was a magnificent presentation, incredibly engaging, so inspiring. Yeah. And I know that it will be viewed many times on our YouTube channel in the future. Thank you so much for availing yourself at such an early time in your day, but also for being so generous in the time that you've shared with our small group today. So big thank you, Pat and Liam. I know Katrina and Terry, you join me in thanking them as well. Our next session is going to be actually next Thursday, which is the 20th of October. So Katrina and Terry, you're very welcome to join us. It is going to be at the time of 4:30 p.m. Australian Daylight Saving Time. And Dr. Olivia Carreolis is going to be presenting Puppetry in Participatory Research. I love that alliteration. So you're very welcome to join us then. Thank you so much, Pat. Thank you, Liam. All the best. Stay safe. And thank you once again for joining us today. Much appreciated.